3 years. That's how long we had. 3 years isn't a weekend fling. It's not a temporary arrangement. 3 years is long enough to build a life. It's anniversaries and inside jokes. It's meeting her mom, Audrey, for the first time and feeling that nervous sweat on my palms, hoping she'll approve. It's learning exactly how she takes her coffee, a splash of oat milk, no sugar, and knowing which of her smiles is genuine and which one is just for show. Or so I thought. I was 29. She was 28. We were at that age, you know. The one where everyone around you starts pairing off for good. Wedding invitations become the new weekend plans and conversations shift from last night's party to interest rates and school districts. We were right in the thick of it. We'd built a comfortable life. I had a steady job in logistics, not glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I was good at it. Serenity was a freelance graphic designer full of creative energy that I always admired. Our apartment was a collection of our two lives, my boring, functional furniture and her vibrant artistic touches. It worked. We worked. I loved her. I really did. I loved the way she'd get completely lost in a project, her brow furrowed in concentration. I loved the sound of her laugh when I'd tell a stupid joke. We had our rhythm. We'd argue about stupid things like who left the dishwasher unloaded, and we'd make up 5 minutes later. We talked about the future, vague, distant future stuff. A house one day, maybe a dog traveling through Europe. It was a beautiful, hazy picture we were painting together, and for the longest time I believed every brushstroke was real. But looking back, there were signs, little things, a possessiveness that I mistook for passion, a need for control that I wrote off as her being organized and decisive. She always had to be the one driving the narrative of our relationship, setting the pace, defining the terms. I was easygoing, happy to follow her lead most of the time. I saw it as a partnership, a balance. I never realized it was a power play until it was far too late. The shift happened about 3 weeks ago. It started subtly, then escalated into what I now call the ultimatum conversation. It was a Tuesday night. I'd come home from a long day at work, and the air in the apartment felt heavy, charged. Serenity was quiet during dinner, which was unusual. She was normally buzzing with stories about her clients or some new design trend she'd discovered. Finally, as we were clearing the plates, she just stopped and looked at me. Her expression was one I hadn't seen before. It was a strange mix of frustration and something harder, something calculating. "Thomas," she said, her voice flat, "where is this going?" I was caught off guard. "What do you mean, we're here? We're good." "No," she shook her head. "I'm not good. I'm 28. My friends are getting married, they're having babies. Audrey asks me every single time I see her when you're going to propose. What am I supposed to tell her? That we're just coasting?" The pressure was immediate and suffocating. I tried to explain my side of it calmly and rationally. "Serenity, you know I love you. But a ring, a wedding, that's a huge financial step. I'm trying to get that promotion at work. I want to have a real down payment saved up for a house before we even think about a wedding. I want to be stable, for us, for our future." It was the truth. I wasn't dragging my feet because I didn't love her. I was being practical. I wanted to build our future on a foundation of rock, not sand. I wanted to give her and us the security I felt we deserved. She didn't see it that way. To her, my practicality was an insult. My planning was a personal rejection. "So I'm just supposed to wait around," she shot back, her voice rising. "Wait for you to decide when you're finally ready. What if that's years from now? I'm not putting my life on hold for your 5-year plan, Thomas." The conversation devolved from there. It wasn't a discussion anymore. It was an accusation. I was accused of not loving her enough, of not being serious, of wasting her time. Every logical point I made was twisted into an emotional weapon against me. It was exhausting. I felt like I was being backed into a corner with no right answer. If I agreed to a proposal I couldn't afford, I was being reckless. If I held my ground and stuck to our long-term financial plan, I was being unloving. It was a perfectly designed trap. The night ended with a cold silence between us, a chasm that hadn't been there an hour before. She had laid down her ultimatum without saying the words. The message was clear: get on board with an engagement now or this is over. For the next week, a tense, fragile peace settled over the apartment. We were polite but distant. The easy intimacy we'd shared for 3 years was gone, replaced by a constant, unspoken negotiation. I felt like I was on trial, and I was losing. Then exactly 1 week after that fight, the hammer fell. I came home from work, and the atmosphere was completely different. The tension was gone. In its place was this strange, almost manic cheerfulness. Serenity had made my favorite dinner. There was a bottle of wine open on the counter. She greeted me at the door with a hug that felt a little too tight, a little too performative. "I have something to tell you," she said, beaming. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. My stomach twisted. I thought, this is it. She's breaking up with me. I braced myself for the impact. But what came next was so much worse. She led me to the couch and sat me down. She took a deep breath, placing her hand over her stomach in a gesture that seemed almost rehearsed. "We don't have to worry about your 5-year plan anymore," she said, her voice a soft, triumphant whisper. "Things are moving a little faster now." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a home pregnancy test. She laid it on the coffee table between us. 2 distinct pink lines stared up at me. The world just stopped. The sounds of the city outside our window faded away. All I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart. I looked at the test, then at her face. She was watching me, gauging my reaction, a slight expectant smile on her lips. "I'm pregnant, Thomas," she said. "I'm 8 weeks along." 8 weeks. The math hit me like a punch to the gut. 8 weeks meant it happened long before our ultimatum fight. It meant this wasn't some accident that conveniently solved her problem. According to her timeline, this was a fact that she had kept from me, a piece of information she'd held in reserve. It made my logical, responsible arguments from the week before seem monstrously selfish in hindsight. How could I have been talking about finances when she was already carrying our child? It was checkmate. My mind was a whirlwind of panic, fear, and a terrifying, suffocating sense of obligation. A baby, our baby, everything I had been planning for, working towards, it was all gone. My timeline was irrelevant. My concerns were null and void. A new reality had been forced upon me, and there was no way out. Or was there? Even in that first moment of shock, a tiny, cold part of my brain whispered that something was wrong. The timing was just too perfect. The solution to her problem, our lack of an imminent engagement, had just magically appeared a week after she'd issued her ultimatum. And her demeanor. She wasn't scared or nervous or any of the things you'd expect. She was victorious. She looked like someone who had just played a winning card. I picked up the test. It felt light, flimsy, insignificant for something that had just demolished my entire life plan. I looked at the lines. They seemed a little fuzzy at the edges, the color a little uneven, but I'd never seen one up close before. What did I know? "Are you sure?" I managed to ask, my voice sounding distant and strange to my own ears. "Of course I'm sure," she said, almost laughing. "You can't get more sure than that. I felt off for a couple of weeks. I took it this morning." For the next week, I lived in a fog. Serenity was in full planning mode. She was suddenly talking about us moving to a bigger place, looking at cribs online, discussing baby names. She started using the word fiancé in a casual testing it out kind of way. She and her mom, Audrey, were on the phone, constantly their excited chatter filling the apartment. I was a passenger in my own life, being swept along by a current I couldn't fight. Every time I tried to bring up practical matters, I was shut down. I was the worried dad-to-be, and it was cute, but it was time to get with the program. I was trapped. I was completely and utterly trapped. Any doubt I expressed would make me a monster. Any hesitation would make me a deadbeat dad abandoning his pregnant girlfriend. She had built the perfect cage, and I had walked right into it. She thought she had won. She thought her future was secure, that she had forced my hand and guaranteed herself a ring and a marriage. She would stand in the kitchen humming to herself while scrolling through Pinterest boards for rustic barn weddings, and she'd look over at me with this look of pure satisfaction. She had what she wanted, But every time I looked at her, that cold little voice in the back of my head got a little louder. I saw the way she'd forget to act tired or nauseous until she remembered she was supposed to be. I noticed how her stories about her symptoms would change slightly with each telling. The little inconsistencies started piling up, forming a mountain of doubt in my mind. She had made a critical mistake. She thought she was just trapping a boyfriend. She didn't realize she was cornering someone who would rather find a sliver of truth in an avalanche of lies than simply accept his fate. She thought the game was over. But for me, it was just beginning. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I was living with a ghost. Not the ghost of a person, but the ghost of my own future. Every corner of our apartment was haunted by a life I didn't choose and didn't want. The air was thick with her excitement and her mother Audrey's incessant giddy phone calls. They were picking out color palettes for a nursery in a house we didn't own for a baby that felt less real to me by the second. I felt like a prisoner, watching the guards cheerfully build my gallows. Serenity, for her part, had never been happier. She floated through the apartment, a smug, serene smile plastered on her face. She thought she had me. She thought every loving glance she gave me was another brick in my prison wall. Every time she'd put my hand on her flat stomach and whisper, "Can you feel it?" my skin would crawl. But on the outside, I played my part. I nodded, I smiled, I made all the right noises. I had to, because that cold, clear voice in my head was no longer whispering. It was speaking. And it was telling me that if I wanted to escape this cage, I couldn't just rattle the bars. I had to find the key. The key came to me on a Tuesday night. I was sitting on the couch pretending to watch some reality show, but my eyes were unfocused. Serenity was on the phone with Audrey discussing the pros and cons of a home birth. The audacity was breathtaking. She was building this fantasy world with such confidence, with such detail that for a moment I almost believed it myself. She was creating a reality so dense that my own objections couldn't penetrate it. And that's when it hit me. Reality. Objective, undeniable medical reality. That was the key. Her entire plan rested on two things that doctored test, and my terrified silence. My fear of looking like a monster was the lock on the cage. If I confronted her, she'd cry. She'd accuse me of being unsupportive, of being cruel. She'd tell her mom, who would tell everyone that I was abandoning her in her time of need. It would be my word against hers, and in the court of public opinion, the supposedly pregnant woman always wins. I couldn't fight her on her terms in our apartment, where her narrative was king. I had to change the venue. I had to move the battlefield to my ground. A plan began to form, a beautiful, terrifying, intricate piece of machinery. It started with a single name, Dr. Jasper Martin. Dr. Martin wasn't just any doctor. He was 52 years old with a calm demeanor and eyes that had seen everything. More importantly, he had been my family's physician for 18 years. He'd given me my vaccinations when I was 11 and stitched up my chin after a nasty bike accident when I was 14. He was a pillar of unshakable integrity, a man my parents trusted implicitly and whose word was scripture in our family. By a stroke of beautiful karmic luck, his specialty was obstetrics. He was the perfect catalyst. The next morning, I put the plan into motion. I waited until Serenity was in the shower, then took a deep breath, plastered the biggest, most loving smile I could manage on my face, and walked into the kitchen to make coffee. When she came out wrapped in a towel, humming a self-satisfied tune, I was ready. "Morning," I said, handing her a mug. I was thinking about something all night. She looked at me, a flicker of caution in her eyes. "Oh yeah, what's that?" "Us? The baby. This is the biggest thing that's ever happened to us. And I haven't been fair to you. I let that hang in the air." I saw her relax slightly. An apology. She loved apologies. They reinforced her power. I've been so wrapped up in the logistics, the money, the stress. I haven't been celebrating. I continued, my voice full of manufactured sincerity. And I want to. I want to shout it from the rooftops. I want our families to be a part of this from the very beginning. Now she was beaming. This was everything she wanted. "Thomas, that's so sweet. I knew you'd come around." "I want to do something special," I said, leaning in, selling it with everything I had. "I want to schedule an ultrasound, but not just any ultrasound. I want to make it an event, a celebratory ultrasound. We'll invite my parents and we'll invite your mom. We'll all see our baby for the first time together. We can make it like a pre-engagement celebration, the official start of our family." I had dangled the perfect bait. Pre-engagement celebration. The words she had been dying to hear. I saw the flash of pure triumph in her eyes. This was it, the public declaration, the family buy-in, the final nail in the coffin of my freedom. She thought this was me finally and completely surrendering. But there was a hook inside the bait. "I already know who to call," I added, making it sound like a happy afterthought. "My family doctor, Dr. Martin. My mom loves him. He's been with us for 18 years. It would mean the world to them if we went to someone they trust so much." And there it was. The trap was set. I watched her face. For a split second, I saw it. Pure, undiluted panic. Her smile faltered. The color drained from her cheeks. Her mind was racing the gears, turning, searching for an escape route, an excuse, any reason why we shouldn't go to my doctor. But she couldn't find one. How could she? I had framed it so perfectly. To refuse would be to admit something was wrong. To suggest her own doctor would seem suspicious. I had wrapped the poison in so much sugar that she had no choice but to swallow it. Her recovery was impressive. The panic vanished, replaced by a radiant, if slightly brittle smile. "Oh, your doctor. That's a wonderful idea, honey. Really. It'll be so special for everyone." "Great," I said, pulling out my phone. "I'll call his office right now and set it up for next week." She just nodded, unable to speak. She walked back to the bedroom, and I heard the click of the door. Checkmate. I made the call. Dr. Martin's receptionist was lovely. I explained the situation, laying the celebration aspect on thick. I scheduled it for the following Tuesday. The countdown had begun. My next call was to my parents. They were ecstatic. My dad was gruff but proud. My mom was already crying with happiness. They loved the idea of seeing their first grandchild with Dr. Martin, a man they considered practically family. They were in. Then the final move. I called Audrey Rivera Serenity's 55-year-old mother and chief co-conspirator. I put on the performance of a lifetime. I was the dutiful, excited son-in-law-to-be. I told her how much I loved her daughter, how I wanted to make this pregnancy reveal a moment our families would cherish forever. "Audrey," I said, my voice dripping with emotion, "I want you there. It wouldn't be the same without you. We're going to my family's doctor, Jasper Martin, a wonderful man. We'll all be in the room together when we see the little one for the first time." She ate it up. She was gushing, telling me she knew I was the one for her daughter, that she was already knitting booties. She promised she would be there, front and center. The trap was now fully armed. The week leading up to the appointment was a master class in psychological warfare. Serenity was a wreck, but she was trying desperately to hide it. She was overly affectionate, constantly touching me, kissing me, telling me how much she loved me. She was trying to reinforce the reality she had built, hoping that if she acted pregnant enough, it would somehow become true. She'd complain of morning sickness, but only when she remembered to. She'd talk about strange food cravings, but then I'd see her eating whatever she normally ate. The cracks in her performance were turning into canyons, but I pretended not to notice. I, on the other hand, had never been calmer. Once the plan was in motion, a strange peace settled over me. I was no longer a victim of her scheme. I was the architect of its downfall. I was polite, attentive, and supportive. I listened to her and Audrey discuss baby shower themes. I rubbed her back when she claimed it was aching. I was the perfect partner, playing my role with an unnerving precision that I think on some level terrified her. The man who had been questioning their future 3 weeks ago was now the perfect doting father-to-be. It was too good to be true, and we both knew it. The night before the appointment, she couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, sighing heavily. Around 2 a.m, she sat up. What if something's wrong?" she whispered in the dark. I knew what she was doing. She was planting a seed, laying the groundwork for a potential out, the miscarriage excuse. It was a vile, desperate move, and it ended any lingering shred of compassion I might have had for her. I turned over and put my arm around her. "Don't think like that," I said, my voice a soothing balm on her panic. "Everything is going to be perfect. Dr. Martin is the best. Tomorrow is going to be one of the happiest days of our lives. I promise." She lay back down, but I could feel the tension humming through her body. She was trapped and the walls were closing in. The next day, we drove to the clinic. It was a beautiful, sunny afternoon. Serenity was dressed up wearing a flowing dress that she thought made her look maternal. She was quiet in the car, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. I made small talk, pointing out landmarks, talking about the weather, keeping the mood artificially light. We walked into the waiting room and our families were already there. My mom and dad beaming with pride, and Audrey Rivera looking like the cat that got the cream, already acting the part of the doting grandmother. Hugs were exchanged. My mom hugged Serenity, telling her she was glowing. Audrey squeezed my arm and winked as if we were partners in a grand, successful conspiracy. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. A nurse called Serenity's name. We all stood up, the 5 of us. Me, Serenity, my parents, and her mother. We were ushered back into the examination room. It was a large room clearly designed for these kinds of family moments. There was a chair for Serenity next to the examination table, several other chairs lined up against the wall for the audience, and a large monitor perfectly positioned for everyone to see. Serenity squeezed my hand, her palm slick with sweat. She gave me a weak, terrified smile. "This is it," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "The first day of the rest of our lives." I looked from her panicked eyes to the smiling faces of our parents, then to the cold black screen of the ultrasound machine. I squeezed her hand back. "You have no idea," I said. Dr. Jasper Martin came in a few moments later. He was a man I'd known for 18 years, a calm and steady presence who had seen me through broken bones and bad cases of the flu. He was 52 now, with kind eyes and a reassuring smile, but today his expression was pure, unreadable professionalism. He greeted my parents warmly, then me. When he turned to Serenity and her mother, he was polite but formal, shaking their hands. "Well," he said, looking around at the expectant faces, "quite a party. Thomas tells me we're here for a celebratory first look." Audrey Rivera practically vibrated with excitement. "Oh, we are just so thrilled, Doctor. We can't wait to see our grandbaby." Dr. Martin nodded, his eyes briefly meeting mine. There was a flicker of understanding there, a silent acknowledgement of the phone call I'd made a week ago, where I had laid out my suspicions and my plan. He had simply listened and agreed to perform his duties with objective precision. That's all I had asked for. "Of course," he said, turning his attention to Serenity. "Now, Serenity, before we do the ultrasound, my nurse is just going to take a quick blood sample. It's standard procedure for all new obstetric patients on their first visit. Just a formality to confirm the pregnancy and check your hormone levels. We'll have the preliminary HCG results from our in-office lab in about 10 minutes. This was the first hurdle, the one she couldn't have predicted. A home test can be faked. A doctor's blood test cannot. I watched Serenity's face as the color drained from it. Her eyes darted towards me, wide with panic. She opened her mouth to object, to say she felt faint, to come up with any excuse, but she was trapped. How could she refuse a standard routine test in a room full of people celebrating her pregnancy? To do so would be an immediate admission of guilt. Audrey, oblivious, patted her daughter's arm. "Don't you worry, sweetie. It's just a little pinch." Serenity looked at her mother, then back at me, her gaze pleading. But my face was a mask of pleasant encouragement. I was the supportive partner. I was on her side. She swallowed hard and nodded, extending her arm for the nurse. I didn't watch the needle go in. I watched her. I watched her squeeze her eyes shut as the vial filled with the truth. As the nurse left with the sample, Dr. Martin began prepping for the ultrasound. The energy in the room was electric. My parents were leaning forward in their seats, whispering excitedly. Audrey was already misty-eyed. Serenity lay back on the examination table, a single silent tear, tracing a path from the corner of her eye to her temple. She looked like a prisoner on the gallows. "All right, this gel will be a little cold," Dr. Martin said gently, as he moved the transducer over her stomach. Every eye in the room snapped to the large monitor on the wall. It flickered to life, showing a swirling landscape of gray and black static. Dr. Martin moved the wand slowly, methodically. The room was dead silent save for the soft clicking of the machine and the sound of my own heart beating a steady rhythmic drum against my ribs. 1 minute passed, then 2. The screen remained a formless void. My mother's smile began to look strained. My father frowned, a line of confusion creasing his brow. Audrey leaned forward, squinting at the screen as if she could will an image into existence. Is everything all right, doctor?" My mom asked, her voice wavering. Dr. Martin didn't take his eyes off the screen. He continued his search for another full minute, leaving no room for doubt, no possibility of error. He was giving her every single chance. Finally, he froze the meaningless pattern of shadows, put the transducer down, and picked up a small remote, pointing a red laser dot at the screen. He turned to face us. His voice was calm, clinical, and carried the weight of absolute authority. Well, he began indicating the screen. As you can see here, the ultrasound shows no gestational sac. A collective gasp filled the room. Audrey was the first to speak, her voice sharp with denial. What does that mean? Are you saying you can't find it? Maybe the machine is broken. She's 8 weeks along. We saw the test. Dr. Martin's gaze was unwavering. He didn't look at Audrey. He looked at Serenity. At that exact moment, a soft knock came at the door, and the nurse slipped a piece of paper into his hand. He glanced down at it before continuing, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "It means there is no visible sign of a pregnancy," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He held up the paper, and this confirms it. The mandatory pre-procedure blood test confirms an HCG level below 5 milli-international units per milliliter. The patient is not pregnant. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving a vacuum where all the joy and excitement had been just moments before. I looked at Audrey Rivera. The smug, triumphant matriarch was gone. In her place was a woman whose face had collapsed into a mask of pure, unadulterated humiliation. Her jaw was slack, her eyes wide with horror as she stared at her daughter. She looked utterly betrayed. I looked at my parents. My mom had her hand over her mouth, her eyes filled with a dawning, heartbreaking understanding. She wasn't looking at Serenity. She was looking at me. And in her eyes, I saw the pieces of the last 3 weeks clicking into place. My suspicion, my insistence on using our doctor, my orchestration of this entire public event. My father just looked grim, his hand resting on my mother's shoulder, his expression hardening as he understood the depth of the deception. And then I looked at Serenity. She was still lying on the table, staring at the ceiling. Her face was a blank canvas. No more tears, no more panic, just nothing. The emptiness of a lie so thoroughly and publicly dismantled that there was nothing left to salvage. She had been exposed so completely, so medically, so irrefutably that there was no way out. No story about a miscarriage, no blaming a faulty machine. The truth was there in black and white on a piece of paper and a blank screen. In that moment of absolute crushing silence, a sound bubbled up from deep inside my chest. It started as a tremor in my diaphragm, and then it broke free. A laugh. It wasn't a laugh of humor or cruelty. It was a laugh of pure, cathartic, overwhelming relief. It was the sound of chains breaking the sound of a 2-ton weight being lifted off my soul. It was the sound of my future being handed back to me. It was loud and it was honest, and it echoed in the sterile, silent room. I didn't look at her again. I didn't need to. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. I stood up, without a single word, without a backward glance at the woman I had spent 3 years of my life with, or her horrified mother, or my own stunned parents. I turned my back on the entire scene. I walked out of the examination room, past the nurse's station, and through the waiting room. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the clinic, and the bright afternoon sun hit my face. I was 29 years old. I was unmarried. And for the first time in weeks, I was free.